April 1945. While the world's attention was fixed on Berlin's destruction, something far more terrible was unfolding southeast of the capital. An entire German army was being methodically exterminated inside a carefully constructed death trap. The Berlin-Dresden Autobahn had transformed into a corridor of annihilation, a broad concrete ribbon where German armor, transport trucks, and refugee wagons attempted desperate sprints across open ground, only to be systematically destroyed by Soviet guns positioned on the far side. This was the Battle of Halbe. 9 days of slaughter where over 80,000 soldiers and thousands of civilians were channeled into a precision-engineered killbox, a layered killing machine of pre-registered artillery, dense minefields, and massed armor from which almost no one escaped. On April 16, 1945, thunderous artillery bombardments shattered the dawn along the Salo Heights. Two massive Soviet fronts launched the final campaign against Nazi Germany with crushing force. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's First Belarusian Front attacked directly from the east, while Marshal Ivan Konev's First Ukrainian Front drove northward from the south. Within days, Zhukov had smashed through German defenses at the Silo Heights, and Konev broke through south of Frankfurt on the Oder. By April 20th, Soviet armor was already grinding through Berlin's outer districts. But the true catastrophe wasn't Berlin itself. It was what materialized southeast of the capital. As Zhukov drove westward and Konev swung north, their forces advanced with devastating coordination. The pincers snapped, shut by April 25th, creating an encirclement around the town of Halbe that would become one of history's most concentrated killing fields. Trapped inside was the entire German 9th Army, the 11th SS Panzer Corps, the 5th SS Mountain Corps, and the 56th Panzer Corps. Remnants of the 4th Panzer Army were caught as well. Waffen-SS formations, including the elite SS Division Nordland, found themselves surrounded, along with hastily mobilized Volkssturm militia, and somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 terrified civilians fleeing westward with whatever possessions they could carry. 80,000 soldiers and thousands of refugees, all imprisoned in a contracting pocket with catastrophic supply failures. War diaries document ammunition rationed to mere handfuls of rounds per weapon. Fuel shortages paralyzed the formidable Panthers and Tigers. Tanks that could dominate any engagement now sat abandoned, their fuel tanks bone dry. Food supplies had essentially vanished. This wasn't coincidence. The Soviets had orchestrated this encirclement with surgical precision, converting operational maneuver into industrial-scale annihilation. At the center of this catastrophe stood General Theodor Busse, commander of the 9th Army, studying maps that depicted an impossible situation. From the Führerbunker beneath Berlin, Hitler's orders were unambiguous: attack north, relieve the capital, and save the Reich. But Busse understood the reality. Those orders were delusion, the fantasy of a collapsing regime. The only rational option was west, toward General Walter Wenck's 12th Army and potential surrender to the Americans rather than the merciless Soviets. Type conflicted, intensity high. But could he defy the Führer? And even if he did, could 80,000 encircled men break through a Soviet killing machine specifically engineered to annihilate them? In the Führerbunker, Hitler's finger stabbed at maps bearing no connection to reality. His orders to General Busse were explicit. The 9th Army would strike north, relieve Berlin, and save the Reich. But southeast of the capital, Busse studied a different map, one revealing 80,000 men caught in a tightening noose, their fuel tanks nearly empty, ammunition reduced to a few rounds per gun, and thousands of starving civilians choking every road. This was the ultimate impossible decision. Should he obey the Führer's suicidal delusion or commit the unthinkable and defy him? Should he attack north into the full strength of Marshal Zhukov's First Belarusian Front, or break west toward General Wenck's 12th Army and the distant possibility of American lines instead of Soviet captivity? Busse's objective shifted to breaking out westward. Between April 24th and May 2nd, 1945, the 9th Army would attempt to escape the trap. 9 days, that's all they had. What emerged from the collapsing pocket wasn't an army. It was a desperate exodus. Wehrmacht regulars from the 11th SS Panzer Corps and 5th SS Mountain Corps mixed with Waffen-SS formations, including the SS Division Nordland. Volkssturm militia clutched obsolete rifles. Hastily assembled Kampfgruppen were cobbled together from shattered units. Behind them came the chaos that would doom them, somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 civilians. German refugees fleeing Silesia and Pomerania, forced laborers, and concentration camp inmates were all swept into columns of military vehicles, horse-drawn carts, and families on foot streaming west through the Spree forest. Busse's decision was tactically rational. It was the only sane choice available, but it was exactly what Marshals Zhukov and Konev had anticipated. While Busse deliberated, the Soviets had been constructing something unprecedented. What the Germans didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the Soviet commanders had already won the battle before a single shot was fired. While Busse organized his columns, Marshals Zhukov and Konev were executing a masterwork of operational warfare, the systematic transformation of the forests around Halbe into a three-ring death trap. Konev redirected entire armies with surgical precision. General Vasily Chuikov's 8th Guards Army held the northern perimeter while General Pavel Rybalko's 3rd Guards Tank Army sealed the western approaches. The 28th Army and 13th Army completed the encirclement. But this wasn't reactive defense. This was premeditated extermination. Soviet Stavka orders left no ambiguity and demanded complete destruction of all encircled forces. Every road had been surveyed, every clearing had been measured, every potential escape route had been designated as a pre-registered target. Anti-tank guns, including captured German 7.5 cm Pak-40s and 8.8 cm flak guns, now turned against their former owners, were dug into camouflaged positions at calculated intervals. Minefields saturated the forest floor. Artillery crews had already plotted their firing solutions and were waiting only for targets to enter their predetermined kill zones. The technical asymmetry was devastating. German forces possessed Panthers with their fearsome 75mm KWK-42 guns and 80mm of frontal armor, but mechanical unreliability meant many broke down before reaching combat. Tiger 1s and Tiger 2s boasted 88mm guns and heavy armor, but they were fuel-starved behemoths in a logistical nightmare. Against them came waves of Soviet T-34-85s, each mounting an 85mm gun and sloped armor up to 90mm. These tanks were capable of 34 to 55 km per hour, mechanically reliable, and supported by sustained logistics that German forces could only imagine. Germany's finest tanks became useless steel coffins, while Soviet tanks kept advancing, and Soviet guns kept firing. The Germans simply ran dry. Above the forest, Katyusha rocket launchers, BM-13 systems capable of firing 16 to 48 rockets in rapid succession, were positioned to blanket entire grid squares with high explosive. IL-2 Sturmovix circled overhead, waiting to strafe anything that moved. This wasn't a battle, it was an industrial killing operation, methodically prepared and ruthlessly efficient. On April 24th and 25th, as German columns entered the outer ring, tank commanders reported unusually quiet forests ahead. That silence wasn't peace, it was patience. The trap was set, and now it would spring shut. The forests around Halbe became a vision of hell on earth. Shredded pine trees stood like broken teeth, their trunks splintered by artillery. Burnt-out Panzer IVs and Panthers lay abandoned in the mud, their crews having run dry of fuel despite the tank's tactical superiority. Intensity, medium. The stench of cordite mixed with decomposing bodies. Wounded men screamed in makeshift aid stations with no morphine, no bandages, and no hope. Everywhere there was claustrophobic density, soldiers and SS and Volkssturm militia, and thousands of terrified civilians all pressed together in a shrinking pocket, fighting tree to tree through woods devastated by relentless bombardment. By late April, the German 9th Army's logistics had collapsed entirely. War diaries reveal ammunition rationed to mere handfuls of rounds per gun. Fuel shortages immobilized entire Panzer battalions. Tigers and Panthers, mechanically superior but fatally thirsty, sat useless and were detonated by their own crews to prevent capture. Food supplies were exhausted. Medical supplies were critically low, leaving the wounded screaming in forest clearings or abandoned along the trails. Soldiers ate bark. They drank from shell craters. They watched their comrades bleed out because there was nothing left to stop the bleeding. This wasn't an army anymore. It was thousands of desperate Kampfgruppen of Wehrmacht and SS and civilians with no coherent command, no supplies, and no hope. But there was one obstacle that would become more infamous than any other, one final killing ground that every German soldier would have to cross if they wanted to live. The Berlin-Dresden Autobahn. The Berlin-Dresden Autobahn became the battle's most notorious killing ground, a wide concrete strip cutting through the forest like an open wound. Soviet tanks and anti-tank guns lined the opposite side, positioned with methodical precision in pre-registered firing positions. German columns, armoured vehicles, supply trucks, and horse-drawn, civilian carts attempted suicidal dashes across that exposed concrete. Commanders knew what awaited them. They could see the Soviet guns. They could see the burned wrecks from previous attempts. But they had no choice. Behind them, Soviet forces were closing in, and ahead lay the only path to Wenck's 12th Army and potential survival. So they ran. One after another, vehicles erupted into flames mid-crossing. A Panther would lurch onto the concrete with its engine roaring, only to explode as an 85mm shell punched through its side armor. Trucks loaded with wounded burst apart, scattering bodies across the pavement. Horse-drawn civilian carts carrying families clutching children and belongings were caught in the open and systematically destroyed. Type ash grave, intensity high. The Autobahn became a literal highway of death, littered with hundreds of smoking wrecks and corpses. Soviet gunners didn't need to aim carefully. Anything that moved on that concrete strip was a target, and anything that stopped was dead. Civilians died alongside soldiers. Women clutching infants were cut down in the crossfire. Elderly refugees who couldn't run fast enough were left behind, their bodies adding to the growing piles. Children were separated from parents in the chaos. Some made it across alone, while others didn't make it at all. Between 5,000 and 10,000 civilians perished during those 9 days. Many died on the Autobahn, and many more died in the forests, caught between Soviet artillery barrages and German defensive positions, or killed in the chaos. Type somber, intensity high. This was no longer a military operation, it was a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions. The Soviets maintained their operational efficiency throughout, while German forces disintegrated into chaos. Chuikov's 8th Guards Army and Rybalko's 3rd Guards Tank Army coordinated relentless attacks despite the challenges of rapid advance. Their superior logistics enabled continuous pressure, armor-cutting escape routes while artillery crushed any concentration of resistance. Soviet commanders received constant intelligence updates. They adjusted firing solutions in real time. They repositioned armor to block new escape attempts. They maintained communication across multiple armies, ensuring no gap opened in the encirclement. This was textbook late-war Soviet operational art. Overwhelming firepower, sustained momentum, and zero mercy. But the Germans kept fighting. Even a dying army with empty fuel tanks and nearly depleted ammunition could inflict terrible casualties when fighting for survival. Soviet forces paid heavily for their victory. 20,000 to 25,000 killed and another 60,000 wounded. Every forest clearing became a killing ground for both sides. Every attempt to close the pocket cost Soviet lives. The difference was simple. The Soviets could replace their losses, and the Germans couldn't. On May 1st and 2nd, Soviet forces launched their final assaults. The last desperate German groups, perhaps a few thousand survivors, attempted to break through in small scattered clusters. Most were killed or captured within sight of Wenck's lines. By May 2nd, the Ninth Army had ceased to exist. The few who made it through looked like ghosts. Small groups of German soldiers, sometimes only a dozen men, staggered across the final stretch to Wenck's 12th Army lines between May 1st and 2nd. They emerged from forests that had become killing grounds. Their uniforms were caked in mud and blood. Their eyes were hollow from 9 days of continuous bombardment and hand-to-hand fighting. Many couldn't speak. Some couldn't stop shaking. All of them had watched their friends die. Behind them, the Ninth Army had effectively ceased to exist. The accounting was grim. At least 30,000 to 40,000 German soldiers lay dead in the forests around Halbe. Bodies piled in the shattered tree lines sprawled across the Autobahn and floated in the streams. Another 25,000 to 30,000 were captured by Soviet forces, most wounded and all exhausted beyond the point of resistance. Between 5,000 and 10,000 refugees, women and children, died in the crossfire, caught between Soviet artillery barrages and German defensive positions, crushed under tank treads on the Autobahn, or killed in the chaos. Soviet forces paid heavily for their victory as well, 20,000 to 25,000 killed, and another 60,000 wounded. These staggering numbers reflected the ferocious desperation of German resistance. Even a dying army with empty fuel tanks and nearly depleted ammunition could inflict terrible casualties when fighting for survival. The cost revealed an uncomfortable truth about the Soviet killbox. Even a perfectly executed extermination operation demands a butcher's bill from both sides. Type mass reflective intensity. Medium. Today, the Waldfriedhof Halbe, the Halbe Forest Cemetery, stands as permanent testament to those 9 days. It's one of Germany's largest war cemeteries, containing tens of thousands of remains recovered from the forests over decades. Row upon row of simple stone crosses stretch beneath peaceful pine trees. Many graves are marked simply, "Unknown German Soldier," and some contain multiple bodies buried together as they died. The forests are quiet now. Birds sing. Sunlight filters through the pines. Visitors walk the trails, unaware they're stepping over ground that once ran red. But the earth still surrenders its dead. Even 75 years later, construction crews and hikers occasionally discover remains. A skull in the underbrush, a rusted helmet, or bones scattered by decades of forest growth. Each discovery triggers a careful excavation, a forensic examination, and often a burial at Halbe, with full military honors for a soldier whose name was lost in the chaos of those 9 days. The Battle of Halbe epitomized the Eastern Front's brutal endgame, not strategy or objectives, but annihilation and survival. General Busse's rational decision to break west was doomed before it began, crushed by Soviet operational brilliance and German logistical catastrophe. Marshals Zhukov and Konev had created something unprecedented, a multi-layered death trap where every German decision had already been anticipated and prepared for. Which forest path to take, which clearing to cross, and when to attempt the Autobahn, all of it had been planned for. The Ninth Army wasn't defeated in battle. It was processed through an industrial, killing machine systematically destroyed by overwhelming Soviet material superiority, sustained logistics, and ruthless operational coordination. The Ninth Army's path to freedom became their grave. Today, the Waldfriedhof Halbe stands as silent testament, tens of thousands of graves beneath quiet forests, marking the spot where a dying regime's delusions met a desperate army's will to survive, all systematically destroyed in a perfectly engineered slaughterhouse. The 9 days of Halbe proved that by April 1945, German tactical courage was utterly irrelevant against the Red Army's vengeful efficiency. No amount of bravery could overcome empty fuel tanks. No tactical skill could defeat pre-registered artillery. No desperation could break through 3 concentric rings of Soviet steel. Intensity, medium. And in April 1945, the Germans had run out of all 3. If you enjoyed this video, Hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.